What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today, we're going to be doing a Season 4 RTA tier list, talking about the characters that right now you need to be watching out for, or if you have, are very, very good in the current meta. So we will be getting to that tier list in a second, and the video should be broken up into brackets. So if you like the video and want to see more tier lists, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. And also comment down below if you think I got a certain unit wrong, if you disagree with something, if you want more clarification on a certain unit, maybe I glossed over it, or maybe I missed something. Make sure you comment down below. I am human and I do make errors. But yeah, without further ado, let's actually get to the video. As always, before I get to the tier list, I always like to preface these by saying that they are primarily going to be my opinion, and I did confer with other high-level champion players as well as other couple of legend players in our Discord server to discuss some of the placements of certain units and some of the things that they see a lot and their thoughts overall. I also didn't use too much of the E7 World Cup because they did have a slightly different format because it was a 2-ban, but some of those units do have higher stats because of that. So it's kind of like I used it, but not all the way, right? Because the E7 World Cup was way different from actual RTA ranking. There are some other considerations that you need to think about. But enough about me rambling. I'm sure you just want to see the tier list. So let's go over to the tier list and let's start discussing it, right? So as far as the tier list, we will have it right here. So this is going to be the tier list. I will zoom in a little bit and I will glance over in case you want to look at it. I will be breaking down each of the tiers and talking about each of them. Honestly, he can honestly almost go down. But just gotta look through it. So I'll discuss the tiers themselves, and I also will be putting timestamps so you know when I start talking about certain tiers. So yeah, there we go. And then let's talk about like the overall for the tier list, how it's ranked up. So high priority, these are units that are getting picked a lot, and if you have these units, you want to pick them as early in the draft as possible. These are units that are extremely powerful, that have been very, very strong, and are pretty much meta defining units that you need to pick as soon as possible, or your opponent will pick them away from you. As far as the meta, these are units that are very, very strong in the current meta. They do extremely well. They're not necessarily weaker than the high priority, just not as high priority as these, right? So it's not as imperative that you get these picks in the first 2 to 3 picks, right? So it's not as imperative. These are units that are still very strong in the current meta. You can definitely still use and have great success, if not amazing success, in the current meta. Counterpick, these are units that you primarily will be picking on your 4th and 5th pick that can counter certain units and do help a lot in certain situations. So they're kind of in the tier on their own. Cleave this time does also get their own tier because it's hard to rank Cleave with all these other ones because Cleave is a very specific playstyle. All the units, depending how Cleave does, that's how these units will do, right? So it's kind of like they go hand in hand. Then we have units that are good. These are units that are still very good, that can still perform, but are just not as strong as their other peers or require a little bit more setup and a little bit more thinking. This by no means means that these units are bad and can't get you a ton of W's. It just means that compared to meta units, you're not going to be seeing them as much. They're not going to be getting the same results because they are overall not as powerful and as versatile as some of the higher picks. And then we have the niche tier. Again, these are units that can perform really well, like extremely well in very specific situations or very specific teams. You can use these units, just know that you'll have to commit a lot, and against very good players, it'll be hard to pull some of these units off, but it's still something you can use. Outclassed, there's better units that just do their job better, or they just can't compete. Even though they bring some unique stuff, they just can't compete. And then last but not least, meme tier. Basically, this is just units that, unless you're just playing RTA to have fun, which is a big part of Epic 7, you probably shouldn't be using these units. If you're trying to climb very, very high, you probably shouldn't be using these units. So that's going to be the tier list. Again, this is through the eyes of a champion and above player. If you're someone who's struggling to get into Masters, if you're from Bronze all the way even to Challenger, the meta might be slightly different for you. It usually takes some time for it to develop. So I do want to point that out. So while certain units may not be as strong as your rank, like maybe RTA Mercedes is nothing, you know, she doesn't really do much in Masters, but higher in Champions she does a lot, while Arbiter Vildred in like Gold is probably one of the most high priority units, right? So there's a lot of differences between the different tiers. So this is through the eyes of a champion player and above, right? So these units, that's where they rank. So like, for example, Arbiter Vildred would rank higher. I'm not going to make those distinctions. Just know that it is slightly different as you go down the tiers, and you need to be aware of this stuff. But okay, enough disclaimers. Let's actually get to talking about units, which is what I'm sure you came here for, to learn about different units. So first, let's start with high priority. So this officially will start the high priority list, and I'll go over it. The high priority is actually going to be ranked. So these are units. This is the order that these units kind of are prioritized for the most part. You can move some up and down. Like for example, A Talman is not as big as he used to be. He honestly would be here. But for the most part, these are pretty much ranked with these two, right? So first, let's start with General Purgus. General Purgus right now is probably the biggest first pick that you'll have to deal with and one of the most picked units at high level. He just provides so much with the team. The CR pushing ability kind of stops a lot of AoE, which is very prevalent in the current meta, and it's very hard to deal with him, as well as him giving an attack buff makes certain DPSs extremely valuable. So the big reason why he's so popular is his versatility. He can fit into a variety of teams. He does damage with his Bruiser build, and there's not a lot you can do to a good General Purgus team, right? And just the versatility in draft is amazing. This guy is by far the most first pick unit in high bracket. It's just insane what he can do. Then next, we have none other than Fallen Cecilia. When it comes to defending your team, Fallen Cecilia is still the unit. The barrier just eats and soaks up so much of the damage. The skill nullifier mitigating a full AoE, and then all of this still having a chance to provoke. All very, very good, powerful things. Without FCC, teams just typically are not as tanky. But that does not mean that you can't play a tanky playstyle if you don't have Fallen Cecilia, as we'll see with the next one being Troublemaker Croisset. Troublemaker Croisset is a newer unit that honestly has just propelled himself up in the meta. The biggest thing that this guy does is he essentially gives any unit a stronger C-side passive that's in the backline, right? So if you have Troublemaker Croisset and you have a unit in the backline, that unit gets a lot of damage sharing because he takes 40%, which is a ton. That means your Arbiter Vildred, if normally it will do, for example, against Tene, who's one of the biggest DPSs, if it will do 10k, it is now doing 6k if there's a T-Croisset. That's significant. That's the difference between killing the Tene and not killing the Stene and losing the game. So Troublemaker Croisset, his ability to do that is insane. Then on top of that, he also has CR pushing if you hit the backline, allowing him to take more turns. He will also counterattack if you hit the backline and can stun with, I believe, like 60% chance, which is a really good chance, right? He has a pretty good chance of stunning on the S1, which can be very annoying, can disrupt your flow. And on top of all this, he has an S3 that can clear debuffs and give increased defense and increased crit resistance. You can also make it CR push, which is just invaluable, right? It makes it so things like Bazaar and all these other AoE units, think of Landy, right? Landy hits the backline. They're forced to because they use AoE skills. That will push Troublemaker Croisset up by 20%. Or I forget the exact percentage, but it will push Secret Set up, and if it's on Steadfast, it's even higher push up. And then you're able to use that S3 on a unit and give them CR push with that S3, as well as cleansing them and potentially taking the turn away from your opponent. It's just the amount of disruption that he has is ridiculous, and the protection is absolutely invaluable. This guy has become one of the more meta units right now, and the amount of stuff he does is ridiculous. Then we have Landy and Stane. They're kind of grouped together. The reason why all these other units are so powerful, like General Purgus, FCC, Troublemaker Croisset, is although they may only provide protection and disruption, they are setting up for these two units. These two units are the reason why this meta is so bulky. Because if you protect Stene or Landy, they will just rip the team apart. On Landy's side, she has the Bloodstone build as well as the Speed build, although the Speed damage build is still the more popular build with Guiding Light, which makes it so not only can you not hit her with single target damage, but if you try to reveal her off of Guiding Light with an AoE, you're also going to be hitting a General Purgus that's going to push her up, or you're hitting a T-Croisset that's pushing him up and allows you to give Landy CR and a defense buff and a crit resistance, or allows you to cleanse a debuff from like a Bazaar, right? So it makes it extremely hard to actually reach and kill the Landy with all these other units, or even like a Fallen Cecilia to even reveal off of stealth without a strip. So it makes Landy extremely valuable because she just does so much AoE. The speed buff just provides so much advantage, and the S1 lapping, she just becomes a ticking time bomb. By the time she gets her second or third S3, you probably already won the game, right? So it's just as long as you can protect her for that long, she pretty much wins the game. Then on the same side, you have Stene. Same idea. You can only reach her with AoE, and if you're being forced to AoE, General Purgus is going to be CR pushing the team and giving her these two attack buff, which is ridiculous. These two already do a ton of damage, and getting attack buff is just absolutely insane. If there's a Fallen Cecilia, you have to use AoE to hit the Stene, or the Troublemaker Croisset, you have to do several AoEs to actually kill the Stene, and most units don't have consistent AoE, with the exception of a few, right? Like Seaside and Charlotte are some of the ones that can consistently pump out that AoE damage to actually hit and reach Stene consistently, which makes these two units just insane. Stene's ability to stun on the S3 and the Soulburn on the S1 to hit 2 targets is just ridiculously strong. She scales as units die, so the closer you get to Frenzy, when you have more souls, you can just Soulburn and pretty much wipe a team out, right? It could be just herself with you some souls and you can wipe a team out, which is just absolutely insane. Then you have A Tywin, who's actually starting to fall off a little bit. I want to say a little bit, but not a lot. A Tywin, basically, he just provides a lot, right? He's a tanky unit that is now built on damage. People don't actually build him effectiveness anymore. They build him with damage. And he has an S3 that is spammable with the Soul Burn that stuns and applies slow AoE, which is just ridiculously powerful and just completely destroys the pace of the game. The reason why you're not seeing him as much is because he does have checks such as immunity, and Troublemaker Crossette as well as General Purgus can kind of mitigate a little bit, especially Troublemaker Crossette that's usually built on Effectress. He can go after the Ambitious Tywin S3, cleanse the debuffs, and provide and kind of give you advantage back, right? So that's why Troublemaker Crossette is so good in the current meta and kind of starting to push out A Tywin a little bit from the high priority list. A Tywin's still amazing. The S1 being able to provoke, the cleansing every single turn is just so freaking good. And of course, the spammable S3. And on top of all that, being tanky and doing damage. What more can you ask of a unit, right? Support, damage, and bulky, right? So can be taken down easily. Then you have someone like Basar. Basar, again, is starting to get edged out a little bit because people are starting to build the counters to him. But he's still the premier unit for aggressive teams and for taking down those heavy buff teams. His ability to Soulburn S3 and push units back is just still invaluable. And then being able to apply that and able to be buffed. Getting a turn 1 advantage is very important in certain situations. And having Basar being able to do that, as well as remove all the FCC barriers and potentially stop a General Purgus attack buff from going on the unit, it's just really, really good. And stopping immunity from Last Order Crawl. He still is the premier stripper and premier opener for a lot of teams. And then having the follow-up with the S2 with the attack break and the decreased hit chance, it's just invaluable. He's still an amazing unit. If you don't have any unit to counter Basar, you lose to Basar and it's a force ban, which just that alone makes him very, very powerful. And then you have Last Order Crawl, who I've actually stopped seeing nearly as much. He still gets banned a lot. He's still, just his presence alone, the reason why he's still so good is because it stops a lot of other units that would otherwise do really well in this current meta, such units like Seaside, right? With Seaside, Sten is not as scary anymore because you have a consistent pump of S2 that can actually reach the Spectre Tenebria. But with Last Order Crawl, it becomes a little bit harder. There's also just the immunity aspect of it that stops a Tywin from being able to just pop off, and some other of the units like General Purgus from stunning your team. And also just overall, he's still a really good support in the current meta because he's able to do damage and give immunity to your Landy or your Stene, as well as stopping AoE. Think of a Stene, right? They have to use AoE. If they AoE, they give Last Order Crawl turns, and they also give a barrier to mitigate a little bit of the damage. So again, still an amazing unit, still very, very powerful. Not seeing as much play though, but just his presence alone still drives the meta a certain type of way and forces drafting to always have to consider a Last Order Crawl pick. So now let's move on to the meta picks. So these are units that are very, very powerful in their own right, can do some really crazy stuff, and can supplement some of these units really, really well. So Ravi, whenever you have tanky teams, you're going to have a Ravi. Ravi being fire helps her against units like Landy. Ravi does not have the best matchup against Stene, but besides Stene, she does pretty good. The ability of Ravi to just ramp up throughout the game, as well as the ability for the counter and the sustain, makes it so a lot of these teams that are only running one or two DPSs are not able to kill her in time before she reaches 5 stacks, has that S3, that can just AoE, stun, push everyone back. You pretty much win the game. If they don't have immunity, you pretty much win the game. And it's so hard to take her down because she's so tanky and always has a threat of counterattacking. If you're not running counterattack Ravi, you're not running a real Ravi threat. It becomes a S tier unit to just maybe a B or A unit if you don't have her on counter set. But on counter set, she is incredibly frustrating to play against. Can also fill the slot of a Bruiser with Troublemaker Crossette as a secondary DPS if you're picking like Landy. Or if you're picking Stene and Ravi and they ban the Stene, you still have the Ravi to deal with their team and very hard to take down. So just incredibly annoying unit. The S3 being AoE and stunning and pushing back is just amazing. The sustain is ridiculous. She alone can solo most tank teams, right? If they don't have a dedicated DPS to deal with Ravi, they just automatically lose to a Ravi solo. And it is very fun to watch, but also very frustrating from the opponent. And just every time she counters and cleanses, it just makes people feel bad, right? Very, very hard to deal with unit. Does have counters in the form of Cerise and just getting one shot. But again, very, very good unit. Then we have Tempest Cern. She's still an amazing DPS, and with AoE being needed but also being scarce, she still does really well, right? She can reveal units like Landy and can consistently hit units like Spectre Tenebria, which is pretty nice. But the big one being Spectre Tenebria. The other thing is she's not easy to take down, especially if you're just running her against a full tank team or if you have a Fallen Cecilia. And her DPS with a greater attack basket can be a lot for the opponent to deal with, which is one of the reasons she is this high on the list. Fairytale Tenebria, still one of the best openers in the game, still one of the best last picks in the game. If you last pick F10 and they don't have any form of stopping the F10, she not only gives you turn 1, but controls the opponent into like high heaven, right? They're not taking turn 1, they're going to get debuffed, they're going to get decreased defense, and you just win. Usually, if you have a good team built around F10, you win off of the F10's S3. If not, it puts the opponent very far back and will require them having very high sustained units such as Ravi or high FRS units that can counter F10. So F10's S3 being able to strip and set up being able to be buffed, still invaluable, still really good as a last pick, still ridiculous, and just the speed as well, just very threatening, right? It's always a unit that I end up banning because I don't have something to deal with her, and if I don't ban her, I lose way too much. Then we have Seaside Bellona. I really thought that Solitaria was gonna put this unit out, but Solitaria did not. And Solitaria is not on this tier list. I just realized that now. I will talk about the units not on the tier list at the very end. But Seaside Bellona, even with Solitaria, even with Rana, even with Last Order Crawl, she still continues to stomp because just her presence and just being able to last pick her, it's like, okay, you then pick a last pick, a Seaside counter, boom, Seaside, GG. You can't do anything about it, right? It's an auto win button if you don't have a way to deal with it. And if you have the correct supports with her, which there's a lot of really good support units out right now with T-Crossette, FCC, General Purgus, the S2s usually become too much for you to handle. And the new Lifesteal Seaside Bellona build allows her to survive for even longer, making it extremely hard to kill. And she just pumps out so much damage, and the decreased defense is just absolutely crushing that she just remains one of the best units in the game, which is crazy to me. Even with all the counters that are being released towards her, she's still just dominating. Then you have Cerise, the only real counter to General Purgus, and she can restrict AoE as well as reduce buff duration by 1 turn, allowing her to land it on immunity. Even then, it's not reliable because you can get 15%ed, but outside of just countering General Purgus, which is one of the biggest reasons she's honestly played, is she also does have a lot on the S2 to control. For a Cleave team, she's still invaluable as a Cleave opener, since she's able to apply that slow and later on dual attack with your DPSs on a Cleave to finish off the job, or stun priority key units that you normally wouldn't be able to. The fact that she's a Ranger also allows you to put her on Sasha Thanes for a Cleave. For non-Cleave teams, just the control aspect, the dual attacking, the stunning, the controlling, it can become a lot for the opponent to deal with, and usually people try to focus her down, which is why the tank build is usually the better build. But on the right team composition, a Cerise pick is extremely valuable to this day, being very, very powerful. Now we have Arbiter Vildred. This unit has lost a lot of power. I'm not going to tell you guys that he's the most broken unit anymore, because there's a lot of actual checks to him, which is kind of surprising, which is weird. But the Degen and the speed build are both doing incredibly well. He's still meta. You still have to watch out for him. While units like General Purgus, Last Order Crawl, A Tywin, and then now Troublemaker Crossette have really good matchups against Speed Arbiter Vildred, Degen Arbiter Vildred still remains an extremely hard threat to take out, since he's able to counterattack. You can pair him up with units like T-Cross-A and make him extremely hard to take away. The Moonlight Dreamblade, the counterattacks, the damage, it usually becomes too much for the opponent with a good Arbiter Vildred and with enough luck. With speed ones, it is still very good for Cleave teams. It is still very good for reaching units like Stene. Sometimes the opponents will not bring enough Knights, whether if you took the FCC away from them or you took the T-Crusade away from them, they may go for a more aggressive draft with just General Purgus. In those situations, a speed RB with a Gab is enough to take out a Stene, right? With 2 turns, right? When he comes back, he'll probably take out the Stene. So very, very nice still with the speed RB, but not as nearly as impressive as he used to be. And the reliance on Gab for the speed one and the reliance on proccing Moonlight Dreamblade encounters on the Degen has put him a little bit on the lower on the priority list. Then you have Briar Witch Iseria, who essentially has just made, it's just basically Bazaar, but like better in certain situations, right? They kind of function the same way, that they're trying to strip the opponent of their buffs, but where Bazaar gives you turn 1 priority, Briar Witch Iseria takes away the opponent's chance to retaliate, since she does give an attack break and also does damage, which is honestly really, really nice. The fact that she can also get a guaranteed survive makes it so you can be one shot. So in situations where sometimes they may take an Assassin Sid against Bazaar, they cannot do that against Briar Witch Iseria because she'll either be on Guiding Light or on immunity. right? And then you have her pop the S3, attack break, glancing hit, and do pretty good damage and set up for the rest of your team. Usually you're able to win off of a Briarwitch Iceria S3, so having a good team set up around your Briarwitch Iceria is really, really nice, and you will be getting a lot of wins from it. Just very, very nice. I mean, all these units are very powerful. Then you have our team of Mercedes, who essentially is like the pinnacle of what a unit with a team looks like. If you have the good team with a Meru, she becomes an unstoppable force. She's basically unkillable. You cannot focus down on our team of Mercedes. That's just a fact. If you're trying to focus down on our team of Mercedes, you're probably going to lose the game because she'll counterattack, she'll seal you, she'll proc the S2, she'll glancing hit your whole team, she'll strip all your buffs, she'll get S3, and she'll wipe your party, right? So very, very powerful unit, but needs a lot of setup with units like Doris and Ross, which is why she's not lightly higher. But I think that's like her and T-Crossette, she's unkillable. You cannot kill her. She has a 70% damage mitigation when she's with Troublemaker Crossette. That means your Arbiter Villager that usually does 10k damage is only doing 3k on an Arch Demon Mercedes. You're not killing her, right? LQC is not killing her either to an extent, right? So very, very powerful unit, very, very annoying, very good into the right situations, and counters a lot of the meta, like General Purgus, like T-Crossette, and it's just very nice. Even T-Cern, right? She can counter T-Cern. Very, very good unit. Then we have LQC, who's actually getting a banner next week. On LQC's side, she is still the best one-shotter for dark units. And she's extremely powerful now because Troublemaker Crosette's so popular. She is Troublemaker's Crossette worst matchup because she's able to dunk on Troublemaker Crossette and do significant damage to units like Stene. And because Troublemaker's taking some of the damage away from them, you're pretty much killing the Troublemaker Crossette one-shot. Right? And taking out their tank turn 1 and still having a Bruiser that's decently tanky due to her innate Adamant Shield passive, you're probably winning the game off of that, right? And she still has to sustain off of the S1, and if you give her Sigurd Scythe, then she even sustains even harder. So she is amazing in this meta, and she'll only get stronger as stronger dark units get released into the game. The dunk is just invaluable, right? It's just ridiculously good. Then we have Sage Ball, who honestly I'm not seeing as much, but it's still very frustrating for a lot of players to play against. And the people that know how to use him well, it is incredibly frustrating to go against a good Sage Ball. He's just ridiculously good. It's just I feel like not a lot of people have him anymore. But I feel like as more people get him, he may see more play. He does still also lose a little bit of Troublemaker Crossette due to Troublemaker Crossette inherently being an FRS unit. Unless you're building an effective Sage Ball, which almost no one does, you're not getting the sleeps. But aside from that, besides Fallen Cecilia and high FRS unit, his ability to cycle and sleep is just so incredibly annoying. He counters Cleave, and that's all he needs to do, right? And he still has the S3, so if you try to focus him down, you can retaliate with an S3, pop a unit, and heal back up, right? The amount of control, he's probably one of the best control units, just because of the fact that he's so consistent with the S2, and with the S1, and the S2 being able to strip and sleep, very good, and the ability to take a lot of turns. If you don't use that S2 and you hold on to it, again, amazing. Taking away a turn from the opponent and interrupting is just usually enough to win your game, right? Being able to do an S2, strip a Landy, and sleeper so she doesn't get the follow-up, that's great. If you take away turn 1 advantage, it's a lot worse in a lot of situations. So again, very good unit, very good sleeps, still very annoying. Falconeer Clury has taken a little bit of a hit, but it's still just, again, being able to take a unit out at the beginning of the game is just invaluable in this game, right? Being able to S3 a unit and not have to worry about them anymore, it's just amazing. She also has started seeing a counter build being used and paired off with Bruisers, because what they do is they'll let the opponent take that turn 1 away still, right? They're not trying to speed contest with Falconeer Clury. But since she's on counter, she has the ability to counter and disrupt the opponent's team. She also has the ability to be tankier with the counter build, and just the amount of healing she still provides for that Bruiser team is very annoying. So a tankier, slower Bruiser Falconeer Clury at like 20k HP but only like 220 speed has started popping up a lot more, because you still get the use off that S3 of provoking down and decreasing defense, but you also get to be bulkier and provide more support for your team and more S1s if you end up countering a lot. But of course, the speed build still being really good to speed contest and to take out units early in the fight. Then you have Ross, who again has fallen off a little bit from previous metas. He's not as strong as he used to be, but he still enables a lot of units such as Archie and Mercedes, Stene, Landy. He's just a very solid knight to pick when these other ones are not up for grabs. And a lot of people don't have these other big ML knights, right? A lot of people don't have FCC or a Tywin or Lacerda Craw. And Ross fits that slot perfectly, and in some scenarios better, his ability to give immunity on the S2 is really, really strong, and cycle that S2 over and over again. If you have a good single target DPS, it usually becomes too much damage for the opponent to take. He also still has the S3 to get increased defense, and also having access to Monarchs makes him extremely valuable. Then you have Craw, who is still just the most basic knight, but still so powerful. A good Craw will give you nightmares, right? The S1 being able to provoke is really good on the knight to be able to disrupt. The S2 being able to essentially have defense buff almost all the time mitigates a lot of the damage, and then always having the threat of taking out a unit at any point in the fight is just insane, right? At any time that they do AoE against you and Craw takes damage through Aureus, that just sets you up for an S3 to win the fight, right? To take a unit out of the game, which is just so much pressure on the opponent to try to deal with the Craw and try to lock him down, that a good Craw is a nightmare to go against. Those 25k HP plus Craws, 27k HP Craws, 200 speed, 150 FRES that are just hard, you can't really control, are going to horse you before they even get to half health and just destroy you, are just so good and so well defensive. So that's the meta. There are units that you're going to be seeing almost every single one of your games. Whether you see all 5 being slaughtered for this, it is a very top heavy meta where you very rarely see units outside of these top brackets, right? And the strong you still see a lot of, but outside of these 3, you don't see as many of the other units aside from the counterpicks, right? It's a very top heavy meta. Usually it's not this bad, but this meta is very unit reliant, right? Like there's a lot of strong heroes that you need to have built. Yes, they're not all RGB, but they are very strong, and you have to if you want to do really well, you'll have to draft some of these. But now let's look at the strong, right? So now for the strong, again, these are units that are still very, very powerful. In some cases, better than meta units, but just have a little bit less versatility and are better in less situations. So Roll Light, again, amazing support. Being able to revive a unit, hard to take down. It's just invaluable, right? Again, as we mentioned, Landy, Stene are just driving this meta. If you can protect your Landy and your Stene, you win the game. And having a Ruel, a unit that can just revive them, that's insane, right? Like T-Crosser, Landy, and then you have like Fallen Cecilia, another DPS, and then maybe another support. What do you do, right? What do you do against that team? You can't take out their DPS, and they're just going to ramp up harder than you and just win the game off of that. So having that ability to revive later on and the S2 to heal is just so good. And you can't kill her, right? You can't focus her down. Then you have Vivian, who is honestly so underrated even now. That 3-turn immunity is just disgusting, and with the recent build to be able to cleanse, units like Briar Witch and Bazaar are not as scary anymore, since you're able to cleanse off that unable to be buffed and still give the team attack buff as well as immunity. With Vivian's EE, she usually does run a tankier build now to not be one-shot by speed contesters such as a Kali or a Sid, but if you're able to get that, a Talon is pretty much neutralized with a Vivian. Right? Because Vivian just sets up immunity for 3 turns. It's usually way too long, and she still brings some damage to the table that is also AoE, allowing you to take out units like Stene and Landy, which is just very, very good and has a good matchup against Seaside and other units on this list. She does lose to Ravi though, which is, again, a lot of units on this list lose to Ravi, the lower ones, which is why they're not as powerful. She's kind of gatekeeps a lot of the Earth units, and Vivian is one of those units that gets gatekeeped by her. Top Maruluka, amazing for Cleave, amazing as a speed contester, as a last option unit. If you're able to, if they don't have any stealth units and their DPS is, for example, a Ravi, and they don't have a ton of protection, good Tamara Lucas can take out a Ravi and then finish off the rest of the tank team, right? So a good Tamara Luca is just really, really powerful that can take out Arby's, getting turn advantage with the S1, and also being able to dodge G-Perk. That's another big one nowadays, right? If you're able to do damage to other units and not do it AoE, that is really nice, right? Because if you don't have to hit G-Perk and give the other team the turn 1 advantage, that's good, right? So single target, really good in certain situations. Although, again, Guiding Light and Stealth units. That's why Landy and Stene are so good, Guiding Light. But against non-Guiding Light style units, I mean, she does really good against T-Surin. She does really good against Ravi. She does really good against Seaside. She does really good in a lot of situations, right? And even against units like LQC to an extent, since she does get Stealth herself. So she can actually do a lot of work. Crescent Moon Rin, still really good for aggressive teams. Again, early immunity is invaluable, and being able to strip buffs is also very nice and stun an early target unit, allowing you to set up for your aggro teams. She's primarily just there for aggressive teams that are trying to take turn 1 away from the opponent and set up immunity. So that's why she doesn't see as much play, but she's still extremely powerful, and well-built, well-used MO Rins will net you a lot of wins against the opponent. DJ Basar. Oh man, this unit's S3 just does it all, right? Again, we're not very protect the castle type meta. We're there to try to protect the Landy and the Stene. And usually you think, okay, debuff units can reach them. Well, not anymore if you have a DJ Basar. The fact that he also can be really one-shot right now because of the new passive that he has gets him a guaranteed S3 that is also able to heal a lot of the damage that you would have taken. So they try to open with a big AoE, they will proc your Water's Origin, you'll take the turn away from them, you'll use your S3, give your team immunity, heal a little bit, and just win from there, right? Because all their debuffers, like A Tywin, neutrified. T-Cern, pretty neutrified. Ravi, without being able to stun, not as scary. Right, so there's a lot of units that kind of lose to that. To the C side, not decrease defensing, not being able to put glancing, not being able to put unable to be buffed, not being able to put unhealable. Very, very nice, right? And then still being able to heal off of that. And after that, turns going after, with teams being so tanky as well, you're able to just keep healing with the S1 and just out-sustain the opponent. Even units like Arbiter Villager, right? You're able to like take off the glancing hit. You're able to heal a lot of the damage that he did. And you're able to follow up and stun other units with that S1. Pretty nice unit. Is he absolutely broken? No, but he's definitely on the come up. Kisei. This unit might actually start going up here just because of how relevant Ravi is and how good of a DPS she is. As we mentioned, single target damage, while it does get countered by Guiding Light and by Stene, it's still really, really powerful when you have a unit like Kisei because you can just ban the Landy. And a lot of people have started banning the Landy. And when Landy is banned, people usually pick Ravi. And you know who counters Ravi? Kisei. Kisei not hitting General Purges is pretty big. Kisei being able to weave here is pretty big. Kisei being able to reset an A Tywin is pretty big. Her having insanely high base speed makes it so she can actually take the turn before a lot of the other units can. She still loses to units like Briar Witch and Basar that can strip her and reveal her. She still loses to Landy pretty hard. So that's there. That's why Landy's probably her biggest counter. But with those units out of the way, she does really well, right? Astena can't reach her after she does the S3, but Kisei does have that follow-up S2 to be able to do some damage on that Astena and kill her off afterwards. So Kisei really, really strong at resetting the A Tywin and being able to kill with the S1 that does extra damage on buff targets. Very, very powerful. Rose, man, this unit is still, to me, I don't get why she's not played more. But her being tanky, her pushing up the team and giving attack buff, again, it just sets up for aggressive teams to be able to win the fights against the current Protect the Castle team compositions. If you're able to kill the Protect the Castle DPSs, you usually win the game off of that, especially since they won't have the damage to retaliate, with Rose being able to S2 and holding Aureus for the team. So again, her push-up ability, very, very nice, very, very strong in aggressive team compositions. Crimson Armin becoming another really popular unit. Why? She brings an better than Adamant Shield passive to the table because it doesn't matter if you crit or not. And having that S3 to take the turn away from your opponent, you can have her go at the very end of your combo, right? So you'll have her, you'll have your DPSs, and you'll have like a General Purges or something. General Purges will give your team attack buff, your DPSs will go, and then Crimson Armin just barriers down, puts immunity, and just takes away any chance of retaliation from the opponent and forces the opponent to have to bring strip. And every time you force the opponent to have to do something, that's really strong. So Crimson Armin having access to all these Great Knight artifacts and already having one on herself as a passive makes her extremely, extremely good. Rylet, not the same monster that he used to be. A lot of things actually do counter him now, like Falconeer Clury, like Crow, who is amazing against Rylet. Guiding Light, Landy usually just does way too much damage to the rest of the team. And even standing, you're kind of relying on luck. Makes it so Rylet has not seen as much play. He doesn't ramp up as fast as some of these other units. Even units like Kisei have more DPS output than Rylet, right? Rylet is more of a one-shotter and then a soloist at the end, right? So having lost a lot of those really good advantages that he used to have and not being the premier DPS anymore has put him lower. But Rylet still has a really good matchup against control teams. He can still pump out so much damage. He can still solo the teams that have little DPS. And he's just a really annoying to deal with still, right? Still a good unit, just not nearly as seen as much. Then we have units like Lilius, who again always are on and off in the meta, but having a knight that's able to cleanse, able to S1 with your team, and able to S2 your opponent for provoke, very, very nice, very, very good. Again, being able to cleanse is very valuable against units like Briar Witch and Basar. Also, the fact that she can run an attack build and combo off with other high attack units with General Purgus to do a big S3 with damage is really good on a knight, and is one of the key pieces to a knight cleave. So again, very versatile unit, very good matchups against certain units. The S3 being amazing and still being able to do damage makes it extremely valuable. Then you have Doris, who essentially just makes your team dummy tanky, right? Again, teams that only have 1 DPS, what do you do if you just out-sustain them? They lose, right? So Doris being able to out-sustain the opponent and also keep your DPSs alive, such as our team of Mercedes, Landy, Stene, and give them defense buff, like Robbie, just makes it so they can't kill them. And if they can't kill your DPS, then you win, right? So again, any unit that's protecting the castle, that's supporting the team, that letting you take advantage, that is sustaining, is going to be really, really good in this current meta. So that's it for the strong ones. From here on out, these are just special units that are used in different situations. So for the counterpicks, so let's just go in order. So now, counterpicks. Counterpicks are units that you're going to be picking near the end that counter really, really well. From here on onwards, I'm not going to be spending as much time as I normally do unless this is a particularly important unit. Since these units you're not going to be seeing as much, you just need to know kind of what they do, right? So first, Ray, what does he do? Counters debuff teams. He's Earth. F10A can't really land stuff on him. Cleanse, immunity, pretty good, right? That's all he does. He counters control teams. Arcades, same idea, same vibe. Cleanses, heals, does work, does a lot, stops opponents, right? Very, very nice. Rowana, counters Seaside, counters Cerise, counters Lilias, counters our team of Mercedes. Any unit that has an extra attack, Rowana does really well against, as well as being extremely tanky. Angelic Montmorency is still a decent counterpick against control, but not nearly as good as some of the other ones. Holiday Euphine, with the advent of Basar being so powerful, people have been building some insane Holiday Euphines. She also has a really good matchup against Cerise, and she's just able to cleanse those debuffs and give you turn 1 advantage. And people are building her on a big damage build, so she can actually reveal units like Landy, right? So that's really cool. She still loses to units like General Purgus and units like Last Resort Cross, so you do need to be aware of that. More of a last pick situation, which is why she's a counter pick. Emo Haze, mostly there for Arby, not the same monster that he used to be. Can still pop off in certain situations with Idol Shear, but not nearly as good. Kitty Clarissa, a more aggressive counter to control. Again, being able to take away all debuffs and then dual attack with your highest attack ally or strip the opponent, which is really good into Landy. So both very good. Again, just pretty standard counter to control, but pretty nice on the side that she actually does dual attack. So it's a little bit more aggressive. So they have a very low DPS output control team, like the F10A, like tank teams with like F10A Basar type teams that people seem to really like with FCC. She does like amazing in because she can just keep doing DPS and break them down. A Kali for Vivians and for any speed unit you think you can outspeed, as well as for shadow squatting the opponent, where again, if they don't have ways to reach her and you have a Fallen Cecilia, it gets pretty hard to kill a Kali and she just out DPSs them. Elena, really good into Cleave teams, being able to push herself up and heal the team, and also pretty good into Landy, right? You're able to go after the Landy, heal a lot of the damage that the Landy does, and do an S3. Or if they have General Purgus, you cut the General Purgus S3, you do an S3, you push them up above your team, and then they lose a turn, right? So pretty good counter pick. Not gonna lie, pretty amazing counter pick. Celine, mostly there for Cleave for Oxlots. Doesn't really do a lot more besides that. But there are some units like Top Monoluluka that she does okay against, although it requires insane gear to make it work. Champion Serato, again, amazing into control. And control still has a pretty good matchup, like units like F10A. People that still like to take Basar A Tywin, you can punish with or T-Surin, right? Some people like to do Basar A Tywin T-Surin. That's a lot of debuffs. And if you have a Champ C that's able to hit them, really, really good. And really, really good against matchup against T-Surin. Ammo Ken, actually really spicy right now. Into Golden Boys, into the General Purgus, into the A Tywin. Since these units often do crit a lot, Emoken can actually take them out, and high FRS Emoken will not get stunned by them. Very, very spicy unit. Still being played around with a little bit, but can actually get you some wins. Does lose to Stena and Landy again, which are very meta, which makes them a little bit less good. Acid, again, speed contester, take out early target units like Cerise, Wonder Tene, even units like Basar, if you have a really good Acid with Gap, can actually take out the Basar. Mursa is there for the speed imprint and to speed contest, and also to counter control teams and cleave teams that don't have as much damage, right? F Maya, mainly for very squishy teams and control teams. If they have a very squishy team with like almost like a pseudo cleave type of team, an F Maya, they're not going to be able to kill her, and she can take out a unit like it's nothing and get an extra turn and potentially take out another one, right? So very, very fun unit, honestly. Very, very spicy. Cleave, pretty self-explanatory. They're just trying to cleave. So let's go over them quite quickly. Watch as Shuri's there for the speed imprint as well as to one-shot. Shuri's there for the speed imprint. That's pretty much all he does. And also for some CR pushing and some fun advantages. Operator Sigurd, probably one of the most premier unit since she can counter units like SCC. And the fact that she doesn't do a CR push makes her do really well against units like Selene and Polides, but does lose to General Purgus, right? That's the only thing. She does lose to General Purgus, and to an extent, Troublemaker cross set because she's not going to have the effectiveness to push them back, but a really good aggressive opening unit that can do a lot of damage down the line. Sid, speed imprint, as well as very good single target DPS. Cdom, kind of the cornerstone of a lot of cleave teams. When you crit, she pushes up, and then you get a little soul burn and just tap someone. Vildred, again, mostly there for the speed imprint, and that's pretty much all he's going to be doing. And again, really good AoE damage as well, right? So not all he does, but AoE damage is pretty good on this guy, but the speed imprint is the main reason you would use him in a cleave. She's just literally there for the speed imprint and some damage. Oxlots, kind of a cornerstone. Very few teams don't run Oxlots. The only ones that don't are the ones that don't want to get Polides. But again, very good cleave unit. Again, pushing up, pretty core to a cleave team. Alpha, becoming a spicy unit for cleave teams, being able to take out priority target units or at least poke them down enough that you're able to set up into a cleave. Also gives your team attack buff, which a lot of units don't actually do, which is really, really nice. And if they don't have a lot of immunity, you also decrease defense, which again is really good. So that part, really, really nice on Alpha. Forgot her name. Celeste, speed imprint, can do some damage. Athletica, we all know what she does. She's another cornerstone, but again, because of General Purgus and T-Cross being so popular, and all those units being able to push up themselves, she doesn't see as much play, and usually Cerise has outslaughtered her. It's usually Cerise Oxlots now, or Cerise Operator Sigurd, rather than a Faithless Litica, although she's still a pretty good option for Cleave with the S3, being able to set up Skill Nullifier. Pavel, really spicy if you have a really good Pavel, able to take out a unit right away, and also the Soulburn, just amazing, and the speed is just great. There's some really cool Pavel cleaves. Good Pavels will give you nightmares, and also being able to give attack buff. Very, very good Pavels out there. Ludwig, kind of on the come up, right? Ludwig cleaves are actually looking kind of spicy, and I've been really, really liking it, right? So he definitely does have some potential with like a Crimson Armament and a slower cleave, but again, just really good damage. And then Ian is a poor man's Athletica. That's all you got to know about him. If you don't have Athletica, there's Ian. Now let's look at the good tier. So these are units that are still pretty good in the current meta, but just are not quite there yet, right? Like they just need a little bit of a more push, and they'll be very, very good in the current meta, right? Like they're really, you can still definitely use them. You'll have a lot of success with them, but they're just not as OP as some of the other units. Aura requires a lot of setup, but there are some cleave control units. She's the best cleave control unit, right? She's able to do damage and stun the opponent. And from that, you usually win, right? If you have a cleave with Aura and they don't have answers to it, you pretty much win, right? They'll have to either ban or lose to the Aura. Rin, honestly, is kind of bonkers to me. She might actually come up here in the future. But she gives RNG buffs, but the buffs that she gives are ridiculous, right? Like we're talking gap. We're talking increased critical hit damage. We're talking evasion, right? AoE, 2 of these. You have a really good chance of getting an OP buff, right? That just wins you the fight. And she also cleanses, so units like Briarwitch and Bazaar don't actually counter her because she cleanses, right? And then she's able to also strip on the S1, and she's able to self-heal, and she's also able to decrease defense. Very good support unit that I think is just very hard to play with, and a little bit of RNG for a lot of people's taste. But aside from that, she has the potential to be a really good unit in the future. Imagine just a Ravi with Gab, or like a Stene with Gab, right? It's ridiculously powerful. And being able to cleanse off of that too. Oh. Kayron, mostly there, honestly, to punish no-strip teams that are squishy. Does not see a lot of play outside of that. There's a lot of units like Cerise. There's a lot of units like F10, even Kral, that just make it really hard for him to function, that can strip him. And now even Kiese, right? He just has way too many counters. But if none of the counters are up, he's an amazing AoE damage dealer. And the counter build is also pretty broken. So in teams that don't have strip and are decently squishy, Kayron just kind of destroys. Charlotte, another unit that destroys some meta units such as Landy. She just has a massive matchup against Landy. Does really well against Tene. Does really well against a lot of units. But you lose to things like F10. You lose to things like Last Ride Crawl. You lose to Seaside. You lose to General Purgus. So it's a little risky to use Charlotte. But in the right team, she just dominates, right? She's better than some of these other units and can counter a lot of these quote-unquote meta units pretty easily. Deanne, man, with all the... Deanne would be insane if it wasn't for Bazaar, Landy, and Briarwitch all being so popular, and even F10 to an extent, right? And that turn 1 just being so big right now, Deanne usually takes a full turn to actually end up setting up. But if you have a really good Deanne and there's no stripper, it's just so good when you're able to just out-sustain the opponent and attack buff. Dizzy, an amazing control unit, but just loses so hard to Last Rider Crawl and just immunity as a whole. She can strip with the S1 Lila Violin, but it's just really hard for Dizzy. Being able to force AoE, loses to SSB, loses to General Purgus, loses to Last Rider Crawl, and it's just hard to get S3 off, but if you do, you win the game. Violet, mostly against water teams, he does amazing, but that's about it. He honestly could go down into niche. Destina, really good against control teams if you're really bulking up with some units and they don't have the damage to kill you. You just win the game off of that. Armin, still a really good knight, right? Still has a very viable knight potential, can reveal Landy and do a lot of good damage mitigation. Still pretty annoying. Then we have a Ravi who honestly has fallen down so much. Does amazing against Golden Boys, right? Golden Boys draft is not as strong anymore, like the Last Order Crawl, A-Tai General Purgus draft, because units like a Ravi will keep those full Golden teams in check, right? Those units, you'll be able to do a ton of damage since you're dark, and they're not going to be able to take you down as easily. Then you have units like Cecilia. She's mainly there for the immunity. Has really cool stuff with the S2 being able to strip, and the S3 being able to provoke, but not a lot outside of that. Just a decent knight. Iseria, super spicy, but really hard to use. The fact that she can reset cooldown and hold Guiding Light is amazing. The fact that she can single target strip and decrease defense kind of functions like an F Clary where you can take out a unit very early on. Very aggressive, but it's only as good as the units you pair her up with, right? You need a unit that really uses their S3. I've seen some people use it with Sage Bomb, and this person knows who they are, but they'll do a Sage Ball S2 and then reset with Iseria and S3 someone, and then kill them off with something like a Mersa, right? Very, very cool. So there's some really cool Cleaves out there. Very creative unit and very, very nice. Alencia, just not her meta. The strip is amazing into Landy, but she doesn't have the damage output to win in a lot of situations, right? So she's a nice stripper, but it's not even guaranteed because she doesn't have high effectiveness and doesn't have the damage and the oomph to take away a lot of units. And the fact that she doesn't have self-sustain either to really ramp up the damage later on the fight really has her Alencia quite a bit. So that's the big thing. She's still a really good dragon unit that can just S3, strip, increase defense, and clap. But just not nearly the same level as she used to be. BBK, same thing. Pretty nice AoE, right? And really good sustain, so she can actually do really good into Golden Boys, but it's just hard to do with units like Landy that are very aggressive, or things like General Purgus, and her not having the highest base stats makes it hard to pull off. Broman, still amazing into buff teams. I mean, he's just insane. An S3 still wins you the game, but the inconsistency is usually what puts him down. Inos, kind of slept on, really cool ability to push up your highest attack CR unit, but usually just takes the slot of another really good support, which is why she's not often used. Chu, not enough sustain, but does have a decent matchup against Ravi, which is very, very popular. So against Ravi, she does pretty well, right? So not a terrible unit. Kind of a little bit sleeper. Just the damage is just almost not quite there yet. And usually people prefer just taking Ravi or one of the other DPSs. The only reason she's not higher is because there's other options. If there wasn't as many options, she'd be really good. Sinful Angelica, really good into aggressive teams with Stene and also for countering Arby, but not a lot of uses outside of that. Spez, if you have the right team, he's amazing, but really hard to pull off. People tend to focus him down too hard and kind of relies on stunning, which a lot of times can put you in a bad situation. But if you get the stuns off, sometimes he pops off and just wins you games. Cowrick, amazing S2. One of the best S2s in the game, but him having to S2 and not getting the stealth until S3 leaves him a little bit vulnerable, right, to getting just bopped right after, which still kind of his only issue is just getting bopped after. That's about it. Then we're going to move to niche and outclass. I'm not really going to go over these. For the most part, it's like units like Surmia. While I did use her and she's amazing at one shot, it just requires too much setup, right? So I'm not going to go super in depth into these at all. I'm just going to kind of glance over them. there's just better options, right? For most of these in this list. Sermia, one-shotter. Okay, there's better one-shotters. Although I really did use her and I really did like her. And she did really, really well. Wanda, pretty good against certain situations like Violet. Her, really good at speed contesting. Tywin, still pretty good at cleaving, right? But needs a lot of setup. Tennant, people know how to deal with control at this point. Cessbomb, they're never going to let you keep Ox slots. Shooting Star Arcades, they're never going to let you keep a certain combo and you're taking up a support slot. Sigrid, you're never really going to get the combo off. Maid Chloe, way too many strips in the current meta. Blaze Dingo, kind of hard to set up, but if you have the right team for it, can actually pop off. But again, it's really hard to get. Mui needs to be in a control team. Yuna needs to be insane gear and doesn't bring a lot to the table. Luna, good single target DPS, but that's all she really is. No sustain and the passive is kind of wonky. Pearl Horizon, there's better control options for. Litica or Fire Litica, not good speed contester, but not super insane. So I'll keep thinking about her. She looks so fun, but just so squishy, right? And she doesn't have the follow-up a lot of times. So that part kind of does suck, that she's not as consistent and kind of squishy. Not she's not consistent, but like she can get 15% it. And she kind of just get bopped, right? She does take a unit out, but that's about it. And again, Guiding Light kind of hurts her a lot. Guiding Light just destroyed, right? And units like Stennet, he doesn't have the DPS, right, to be able to deal with a lot of these units and gets locked down. Charles relies way too much on counters. But can't pop off, right? If he gets the counters, he wins. Rusid, nice speed buff and nice speed imprint, but that's about it. There's other imprints, there's other speed contesters, so that's why he's not as good. Horado, really good into healing teams, but kind of hard to draft and not the greatest stats. Gunther, you're never getting the combo off, but if you get Lilius, it's really cool. Dark Corvus, way too slow, and people usually bring at least one DPS or a form of control, so you will almost never get the S3. Purgus can pop off against water teams and counterattacks, but just not nearly as good as he used to be. Helga, you're not getting the combo off with her, and the other unit, not nearly as impressive without that combo. Melissa just requires insane gear. Maya, immunity just destroys. If there was no immunity, she'd actually be pretty good. But the fact that she wants to open because of the S3 defense buff and then provoke, she has potential, but people don't like the design, and people don't like immunity is pretty big right now, and people know how to deal with. And she doesn't bring more to the table besides CC, right, and support. And then you have units like Tama, who you're never getting Iserio with. Adley, kind of a niche counter to Cleave. There's better counters to Cleave, but he can't pop off, right? He can't be really good as a free-to-play one. Ascat can be cool with Rylet and Mercy and other units, but not nearly as strong. Kikirat, counter unit, kind of fun, but that's about all he does. Can't pop off with counter, but like you're not really winning games off of that unless it's like against someone that's lower bracket than you. Lots, again, some people like it for Cleave, but not really that great. Kizuna Ai is kind of a support. I know Tham actually used her and got pretty far with her. She's kind of like a Deannie because she does give attack buff, but not like Deannie's just kind of better. So it's kind of weird. She's kind of like Judith honestly could go into the Cleave category. She's actually pretty good because she's so fast. But again, doesn't bring a lot, right? She's just fast and brings a CR push. That's it. Whereas all these other cleavers do something else for your team. That's why she was there. And her Valen, way too squishy to even get popped off. And then Outclass, I mean, we know more. What is he going to do, right? He's really unique. Outclass is just like, they can be unique, but there's just so many better options in them. And they'll never really work. Like, more, what does he do against FCC? Nothing. He loses. I have him on Godly Gear. He didn't do anything for me. Emeru, the AoE, just not a lot. Flame, really cool. But, like, again, there's other units that just bring more to the table than her, right? For a Cleave. That's the only reason she's not in a Cleave team. Just, like, there's other units that bring just so much more to the table. Like with Elfel can kind of do the same thing she does with decreased defense, but also provides an attack buff and also provides damage, right? So just not the same. Shadow Rose, I mean, there's just so many CR pushers. Emma Leo has a really cool mechanic, but it's never going to pop off. It's either going to get cleansed or just immunity, right? Or he just dies because he has terrible stats. Cerealia, I mean, she doesn't really do much. Broman, there's better strippers. Lilibet can't even counter Arby, can't even counter revives. She's too slow. She doesn't do enough damage. Mercedes, she does nothing besides damage, and there's way better damage dealers. Luluka, there's way better damage dealers, and she's too squishy. Haste, way too squishy, way better damage dealers. Dami, kind of cool with the Reflect, but that's all she does. Gloomy is just watered down Champ C. He's just basically T-Surin, but doesn't do damage. And that's about it. He's basically a mini T-Seren, right? That can use Alris, but doesn't really do nearly as much damage as T-Seren does. And yeah, doesn't really do a lot outside of that. Glenn, again, if she can't even counter RB, he definitely won't be able to counter RB. Sino just never is going to get stacks and doesn't provide enough control. Sven, I mean, Karen already struggles. Sven struggles against the same things, right? So Sven does not nearly enough as Karen. And Karen at least gets like to reset his immortality. He doesn't even get to do that. Crossette, there's just FCC, and there's other barrier units. It's just T Crossette. He's just like a worse version of all the other knights. Clarissa, there's better cleavers. Chloe, really cool single target damage, but like, how are you really gonna get it off? And you just lose to Guiding Light, or you just get bopped. Ball, there's just better AoE DPSs. Cartuja, there's just better bruisers. Rickarus, cool decreased defense, cool buffs, but like, he's not really doing much besides outside of that. Armentia, just the pure burns and stuff is usually not enough, right? The S1, I mean, she's like a watered down version of her ML self. Karen, you're never going to get off anything. Eden is just basically like a worse knight artifact. Bellona's decreased defense is better decreased defensors. Baiken, really cool single target, but there's just better options. Judgment Kisit, really, really fun. The S3 can be cool, but everyone runs immunity now. And using Soulburn on Kisit if you're building a speed one, are you really going to do that? And for Cleave, you would need Oxlots. You're reliant on Oxlots. Without Oxlots, Judge Kisit doesn't do anything, right? So very reliant on their units and doesn't really bring much to the table. Kawana, kind of fun, but requires all fire, and that's never going to happen. Silk, just single target DPS doesn't do much. Eufiend, there's just better cleavers. And Soul just didn't do much, right? The AoE is just not enough. It's very easy to play around, and he doesn't do a lot of damage. And these just don't do anything, right? They just don't. Same thing as Outclassed. As far as some units that were on the list, Solitaria wasn't on this list. So as far as Solitaria, right? I think Solitaria is a cool unit. And she definitely can pop off in certain situations. But it's just like she doesn't even do her job properly, right? Solitaria would be in the good tier, where I think Solitaria does have potential to be decent, but she's an ML hero that can barely counter Seaside, right? It's a force ban for Seaside if you have a Seaside, and she's a decent speed contester, but at the same time, she doesn't bring a lot more to the table and can easily be shut out and walled out by their units and loses to Last Rider Crawl units of that nature, right? So that part is a little bit rough for Solitaria. And then the new unit, Senya, that's going to be coming out, she's probably going to land in the niche tier. So Senya just looks like she needs way too much setup with the attack buff, and it's never going to happen, right? So that is going to be it. That is going to be the tier list. Comment down below if you think I missed anything or misspoke on a unit, or you want to expand on a unit anymore. Again, with this tier list, I always want to tell you guys that it's mostly based on opinion, and don't feel threatened, right? If you like a certain unit, use that unit. You probably can make it work, but it's just going to be a lot harder for you. These are just like kind of like overall how it falls into place. If you have a certain team and it works really well for you, while it may work for you, it probably doesn't work for a lot of other players, right? If not, that unit would be meta. That is why these units are pretty much optimized. And also remember that this is champion, right? So in Masters, again, certain units would be a lot higher. Kayron would probably be here in like gold, because people don't have ways to deal with Kayron, right? And units like Kisei would be like here because people don't have the gear for, right? So just remember that there are some discrepancies in rankings, and just because in your ranking that unit is really good doesn't mean that overall that unit is going to be like carry you all the way to legend, for example. So that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you'll enjoy it, and I will see y'all next time. Peace.